assaulting and did a little harm to his physical body. So we want to be sure and extend healing energy to him throughout this week. Amen?
Amen.
And we certainly want to recognize Dr. Howard as the founder and spiritual director of Truth and Transformation.
Amen.
And acknowledge and affirm him for the diligence he has shown in keeping this ministry alive and well over the 15 years of existence. Amen?
Amen.
So I am indebted every time I have the opportunity to stand before you and share a lesson in life. I also want to acknowledge and appreciate the Truth and Transformation family. Particularly those of you who, no matter the weather, no matter the circumstances, press your way to be here and to do all that we can to support this ministry. And last but not least, I want to say a very profound thank you to Sister Michelle for a very beautiful meditation and prayer.
Amen.
So much of what she shared hits our ears in a very new way, I think. But very consistent with the teaching of this ministry and expanding our ability to understand just who we are and better appreciate why we are here in this moment in history.
That's right.
So thank you, Michelle, for sharing with us in the way that you do. I'm also excited because this is the day after the winter solstice. I'm aware of the fact that Sister Michelle held a ceremony, a ritual at her yoga studio, and they participated in about an hour or so of silence. If any of us have meditated, and I think Sister Beverly has said that she prefers the silent meditation, but those of us that have meditated in silence for any longer than 5 minutes know how profound that can be, and how impactful and transformative it is, the level of discipline it takes to do that, but the benefits and the rewards last almost forever. So it's a practice that many of us have to develop our capacity to engage in more and more. But as a way of transforming our consciousness, it is absolutely something we want to do. Sister, I'm gonna, Tamara, would you turn that thermostat down just a tad?
Just turn it on 79, Pastor. Do you want
You
me to
turn
turn
it-
it a little lower?
Yes. Yeah, take it down to
Yes,
about
75.
Keeps trying to fall out. Amen.
Yeah, it needs to be
So let us begin our lesson for today. Oh, Reverend Howard asked me to remind us that next Sunday we are having a fellowship following service, and we'll be serving vegan meals. So please put that on your calendars. Plan to be present with us next Sunday and invite your friends. Our text this morning comes from the Old Testament, from the prophetic book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, and it reads, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." That text immediately raises the question in my mind, why are we instructed to live in this manner? Which leads to my second question, which is the title of this morning's lesson: what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of life? Have you ever pondered to yourself the question, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? The solstice period, season, is the perfect time to ask ourselves this question. We here at Truth and Transformation provide answers to this just about every week. And the answer is to become a Christ being. That is what this chart reflects for us. When at the very top, I am the Christ. That we know is a very radical interpretation of the Christian gospel. That each person who accepts Jesus as Lord and Savior is on the path to becoming a Christ. That's new for many folks. And so we understand, we go from there to say that the primary purpose of life is that each person, each individual, will start and complete the journey from a human being to a God being. Muhammad Ali said this: "This life is not real. I conquered the world, and it did not bring me satisfaction." And I would say, nor could it satisfy either Muhammad Ali or you and I. As divine beings, we become aware of the fact that indeed the physical realm is an illusion. What is going on, much to our growing understanding, is that as God beings, masculine energy, we come to the earth realm, which is feminine energy, and in the interaction of that masculine and feminine energy, we are here to birth new life. Are we together? In other words, no matter what shape the planet is in when we arrive, it's okay. That's just part of the work we have to do. How many of us have ever rented a new apartment or moved into a house? And when we came in for the first time, we immediately discovered there were some things we had to do to make this space livable for us. We didn't run out the door and say, "Oh no, I'm not dealing with that." No, we rolled up our sleeves. We got broom and dustpan and mop and bucket and cleaning towels, and we went to work, rendering that space conducive for a place where we could live and prosper. And so we have to think about the fact that none of us is here by accident. We are all here by divine appointment. And the thing that intrigues me is that we had an opportunity to have a conversation with the Creator prior to coming to get a preview of what we were coming to. And we said yes to the mission. So none of this really catches us by surprise. The problem is that coming down the birth canal, we forgot.
Right.
And so now we find ourselves on the earth plane and we're a little startled. What in the world is this? So it is absolutely right. The world is an illusion. The physical reality is an illusion. We seem to be separate beings. But on the spiritual level, did we not all come from the same source? And if you think about it, if God is the creative source, and God has made each of us in God's image and likeness of the same essential stuff that God is, and then endowed us with these attributes of power, that makes us divine beings. We are not separated, but we are one. We are part of the one whole. It is amazing that we have to remind ourselves of that almost daily, because so much of our existence tries to ensure us or convince us that indeed we are separate and individual. Amen? And if we're not careful and we fall into that mindset, then we will walk right by one another and not speak, not connect, not engage. And the divine plan was that everybody that crosses our path is not an accident. They are part of our reality, and they are here to teach us something and for us to share something of ourselves with them. So we are these God beings sent to the earth plane to reveal our divinity, to restore paradise to the planet. I mean that in the fullest sense of the word. The world is in a state of chaos and deterioration and decline. That's okay. Part of our work in coming here is to restore it back to paradise. Mother Earth is the feminine principle. That's what I was saying. We as God beings are the masculine energy sent to recreate. And we need to begin using the ancient names, like, for example, we use the name God, but do we know that that is a German-derived term? That means the good man or the strong man. So that is Europeans' cultural term for the deity. As ancient African people, we had our own terminology for the deity. And it's important that we begin to become aware of that terminology and begin to use it.
Yes, sir.
One of the terms that I find that resonates with my spirit is Amen-Ra. That immaterial, invisible, essential aspect of creation of just divine consciousness. And so this is a term that ancient Kemetic people used for millennia before our encounter with Europeans, right? It matters not what condition the earth is in upon our arrival. Our assignment is to reassemble the earth plane to make it perfect, whole, and complete as we are. Even if we don't complete the task, at least we should make a beginning, yes? So the first order of business that we come to in terms of the purpose for being here is to make the journey to divinity. Now, that sounds rather obvious. But if you look at the way many of us have organized our lives and have lived our lives for year after year after year, our purpose was not to reach our own divinity. I don't know about you. The generation that I came up with, the mantra was, get a good education, get a good job, so that you could live a prosperous life. And well, get married, have children, right. The 3-bedroom house, the 2-car garage, and the pet and the 2.5 children, right. So and many of us, we watched our parents go through that ritual, and at the end of their lives, the conversation was, well, what are you going to do when you grow up? And the expectation was that we would do something very similar, right? No one was talking about, you are a divine being, Beverly. You are a God being. And what you must do as quickly as you can is to realize your divinity, to activate these 12 powers within your being and to rise to Christ consciousness. I would certainly say that was not the conversation that I was having with the adults in my world, right? And so now we find ourselves living in a culture and a society that has the audacity to have as a bumper sticker, he who dies with the most toys wins. So life is reduced to a simple matter of consumption. The more you can accumulate by the time you exit, the more successful you are said to have been. So if you have the luxury car, the 500,000 square foot home, the jet airplane at the private airport, the wardrobe and the 15,000 pairs of shoes and clothes that you never wear more than one time, then your life is successful, right? Now you could be a thug, a gangster, or whatever. It matters not. As long as you have these material accessories, you're said to be living the good life. You're living large. And even if we don't agree with that on a personal level, it's paraded before our eyes every day. We see it on the television. We see it in all of the media that we are exposed to. And it's very easy to think that the purpose of life is to acquire stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But we see what the acquisition of material things has led to. A planet that is on the verge of exhaustion, that cannot sustain this mad consumption at the level that is taking place, and it is fighting back to simply say, if you continue on this path, the planet will be uninhabitable to you and your children, right? So, the first point that we simply want to make as clearly as we can is that the goal is not the material stuff and its acquisition. but to make the journey to divinity. Now, if that really is the goal, then we begin to organize our lives very differently. And to Beverly's point, it brings me to my second point. After we have put ourselves on the path to becoming divine beings, this next thing that we want to consider is procreation. Be fruitful and multiply. In other words, if children are really as important as all that, and I say they are, because without the children, the species comes to a screeching halt, does it not? So whether we're having children biologically or whether we adopt or whatever, the children become the primary focus of our attention. They should. And in order for children to grow up healthy and strong, they have to see positive role models of what this is all about. So we as the parents or guardians become the first teachers. They learn by watching us. I think it was James Baldwin who said, children may not always listen and appreciate what we say, but rest assured, they will always imitate what we do. And so if children are this important and precious resource that we have in our midst, that requires certain behaviors on our part. So for example, before we rush off and have babies, make babies, we have to ask ourselves the question, do we have the resources to provide a safe environment for them? Right? Do we have enough money to keep a roof over their heads? To put food on the table, to put clothes on their back, to put Jordans on their feet if that's what's required? Right? Do we have enough time available to give them the quality time that they need to be nurtured and educated? Right? I mean, if I'm a single mother working 2 jobs and 2.5 jobs, how much time is my child getting? Right? And when we were so busy thinking about hooking up and maybe getting married or living together or whatever we saw that relationship being, we did not ask ourselves the question, well, what if we produce children? And maybe that has something to do with the fact that, we're performing 500,000 abortions each year because people are using abortion as a method of birth control. But the concern is, if we are serious about raising healthy children in an environment that is hostile to them, we know we have to give them a superlative educational environment and experience, right? And the first thing that we're concerned with is their character development. We are concerned about their intellectual development most assuredly. But we also have to be, as the first concern, focused on the development of their character. What does that saying go? Be careful of what you think, because your thoughts become words. Be careful of your words, because your words become action. Be careful of your actions, because your actions become behavior. And be careful of your behavior, because it shapes your character. And be careful of your character, because it determines your destiny. Do we raise our children with that mantra in the back of our minds? Do you follow what I'm saying? So do we encourage them to be very careful with their ideas and with their speech? Or do we let them just say any old thing that flows out of their mouth based on what they heard in school? Because I, as a public school county bus driver, I can tell you that the speech of the kindergartners will blow your head, will blow your mind. I'm not talking about the middle school. That's a whole nother group. And I'm certainly not talking about the high schoolers. I was blown away by what the 5-year-olds were saying to each other on the bus. And so it was clear that we're not doing character development in our homes. It's probably clear that we have not made the arrangements to have stable homes for these children to grow up in. Frances Welsing said on one of her presentations that black folks, if we're serious about countering white supremacy, we should not produce children until we're 28 years of age. And then only 2 after we turn 28. In other words, there should be a sufficient income in the bank so that when the wife gets pregnant, she can take off and raise the children without it wrecking the house. Most of us don't find ourselves in that situation. If the wife has the child, she got 8 weeks to do whatever she needs to do because she got to be back at work by the beginning of the 3rd month or this house is going under. You follow what I'm saying? And so this idea of the purpose of life, after we become committed to our own development as divine beings, and that's what the children are witnessing in us, our unfoldment as divine beings, so they get the message that that's my path as well. Right? At the same time, they are in an environment that is safe and secure. All the resources for their evolution are provided, and they are able to grow fully to their own potential. And so that means we also have to provide rites of passage. If there's one thing that we have lost our ability to do is to help our young children understand how do you make the transition from childhood to adulthood. What determines whether you're a woman or a man? And for too many of us, womanhood and manhood means we made a baby. So here I am, 16 years old with a baby. I can't support it as the father. She can't support it as the mother. But now we are proudly walking around telling everybody, oh, this is Kiki. Isn't she cute? And Kiki doesn't have a future because neither of them are prepared to do that. Amen? Mm-hmm. And so part of the journey of life as we fulfill the purpose is we have to get serious about the children. It was George Fraser who made me aware of the phrase that the Maasai people of East Africa use. Let me see if I can find that. It's the phrase, I can't do it. But when the Maasai greet each other, the first thing that they say is, and how are the children? And the Maasai were some of the fiercest warriors in all of Africa. But even the warriors, when they would greet each other, whether they had children or not, the way they greeted each other was, and how are the children? And the answer was, all the children are well. Now that's powerful. That's powerful. How are the children? And then to be able to say, all the children are well. Now this society is going somewhere. It's not good enough just to say, well, my kids are doing great, when I know your kids are struggling. When I know this sister's kids over here don't have enough to eat. This kid may not have enough clothes wear. This kid doesn't have the kind of attention that they need. And worse, in America, we've got high school shootings where they're being slaughtered and gunned down by the thousands. And yet and still we can look at the leaders and accept them as leaders, but if they had to answer the question, and how are the children, and be able to say, and all the children are fine, that right there would change the way the society is run, right? So we want to build into our consciousness the idea that the first question out of our mouths when we see one another is, and how are the children? And then take seriously what that means for this community. That means that we're going to have to figure out some things to make up for what the children are not getting as our responsibility, because these are our children. Even though you and I may not have birthed them, they are part of our community. And if we don't handle them, if we don't develop them, then we're going to have a problem with them when we get up in age. They're going to be the ones laying in the cut, waiting to knock us in the head. And we can't blame it on the children and say, oh, them bad kids. No. We had them from the time they were infants. If we have raised them from infancy to the point where they can hit somebody in the head and they still go forward and hit somebody in the head, don't look at them, look at us. That couldn't have happened in the community that my grandfather lived in. And I'm sure I speak for everyone in this room. It couldn't have happened in your grandparents' community either. Because in their community, you could walk down the street and the only thing you could hear was, "Hi, Mr. Jones. Hi, Miss Jones." Children disrespecting an adult was just completely foreign. Thank you.
That's right.
It's completely foreign. And if an adult spoke to you, you better stand up straight and act like you're intelligent, because that's gonna that information will get back to your parents certainly before you get home. And you will have to answer to your parents, didn't Miss Smith say something to you? And what did you say? You didn't stand up and open your mouth and talk like you got wham! You know. Now I don't necessarily think that that's the best parenting practices, you know, but it certainly was effective. As a community, we had children who were respectful. And they not only said, "Mrs. So-and-so," they said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." Consistently. That's the kind of childbearing practices we have to get to and get to very quickly. The last thing that I want to say is that the third piece of the purpose of life has to do with community building and maintaining our communities. I like the mantra that we do here every Sunday: building my consciousness builds my spiritual community. Why is that important? Physical community is the outgrowth of spiritual community. In other words, it's the community on the spiritual plane, in the spiritual space like Truth and Transformation, that then manifests itself in the physical community, and we then have a physical community that is healthy and sound. Am I making any sense? Mm-hmm. In other words, all communities are reflective of a certain spiritual condition. So if our subdivisions are just collections of houses that people drive into, hit a button, open the garage, close the door, and that's the last time they see each other, that's making a statement about the spiritual well-being of that neighborhood or that subdivision. Why are we behaving that way? Because we are programmed to see ourselves as individuals in competition with everybody else, and as long as we're doing okay, everything else doesn't matter. Until there's a crisis and we discover we have to lean on one another. Till a tornado comes through and blows down half the houses in our neighborhoods, and the question is, well, where are these people going to spend the night? Who's going to help them clean up the mess? How are they going to get back on their feet? Whose responsibility is that? Now, all of a sudden, the lack of community becomes glaringly obvious. What I'm suggesting is that if we're serious about our own spiritual development, we will take the business of building healthy communities as a priority in all that we think, say, and do. We will not accept communities where there is very weak or no communication. We'll have to get out and meet each other. We'll have to understand, well, who are your children? How are they doing? What are your goals? Where are you headed? Not because we have an agenda, but because we understand that healthy community is the requisite for healthy living. It's just like if you're inside of your physical body, if your fingers aren't in communication with your brain and with your heart and with your lungs, what happens to them? We know that people who have been diagnosed and suffered with diabetes for years and the blood flow gets weak in terms of the lower limbs or extremities, what happens? They wind up with gangrene and the limb being amputated. Well, the same thing is true. If parts of our community are receiving an insufficient flow of blood, of oxygen, of energy, of love, then they will become gangrenous and have to be amputated. I'm amazed at what God does with us. He gives us very natural and organic examples to teach us what it is that we are part of. So we have the animal kingdom, we have the plant kingdom, we have all of these systems around us to help us understand how it all fits together, how it's all connected. My favorite metaphor, of course, is the butterfly. the idea that we move from the caterpillar to the butterfly. But I'm astounded at the fact that the monarch butterfly makes a journey of 1,000 miles from parts of North America all the way down into Mexico. So that there is tremendous capacity in becoming these developed spiritual beings. We, first of all, gain the power of flight. But as we nurture the generations that come behind us, we build a world where God is present. And that's the final thought that I want to leave us with. Jesus says, don't look here or there for the kingdom is within. As we realize and touch into that internal kingdom, then what God is saying to us through the ancestors and through spiritual practice is that that internal kingdom must be turned outward and manifest as a healthy physical community. What I find extremely challenging is we are living in a world and a time when they do not understand what it takes to build community. They have wealth, they have resources, they have power, and yet they lack the very fundamental conceptual understanding that we have to be connected and we have to be sharing with each other in an environment of love. Now, the black church traditionally has always carried that message. We find now that many of our churches have been taken over, co-opted, if you will, by the dominant culture, which only wants to preach the prosperity gospel. If you have material wealth, God is blessing you. If you don't have material wealth, you must be doing something wrong. Get on God's side. So by that definition, Trump is God's number one person. And we know that that's not the case. However, what is missing to counter that, in other words, if you read the gospel from Matthew all the way through to Revelation, the theme in that whole work is that God is building the reign of God over against the empires of men. That's what you're reading. That's why Jesus was crucified, because he dared to challenge the empire. And Jesus says, upon this rock of revelation, I will build my church. That is this called out community of sisters and brothers. I will give unto them the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So whatever you produce in your mind, whatever is produced in heaven will be produced on earth. Whatever is bound on earth will be bound in heaven. In other words, we as these spiritual beings have dominion over what happens on the planet. The only reason we don't exercise it is because we don't know it. And now that we know it, we must begin at least serious conversations amongst ourselves and ask, what will we do with this power? How can we transform the entire world? And the answer is simple. It begins with the decision to transform self. And then to be part of a community that's committed to the same transformation. And so as I take my seat, I marvel at Truth and Transformation Ministries as a spiritual community. And I challenge us to see this not as a traditional church setting, where we come on Sunday, we go through a worship experience, and we leave and we go home. My hope, my prayer, is that we will begin to see ourselves as family. And as all family, we have some of us have strengths in one area, we're not so strong in other areas. But what I'm lacking, you have. What you lacking, maybe I have. And working together, we can heal ourselves and propel ourselves to be the very best expression of ourselves. And as we do that, we create space where others can step into, and it's sacred and it's safe, and it also helps them to understand how they fit into God's scheme of things. Do you follow what I'm saying? We don't need everybody to be a member of Truth and Transformation. We are moving towards a place of critical mass. And critical mass only means that there is sufficient numbers here to start a chain reaction. That's what happens in an atomic explosion. You take some fissionable material, it starts interacting with the particles that are nearby. It creates a chain reaction, and you have an atomic bomb. What we are saying is that truth and transformation has the potential to drive us towards critical mass. The challenge is each of us has to make the decision to be our best selves as divine beings, to arrive at Christ consciousness, to become the gods that we already are on the inside, and then to use that collective power to recreate the kingdom of God on earth. Amen?
Amen.
You have been transformed.
That wonderful message.